Hey everyone, I'm Dean, and I'm Dow's digital influencer. I'm a rare mixed race guy with dreadlocks, and I'm from London. I've got a hairline looks like going bald, but I'm not really. So yeah, so be imaginative.
Hi everybody. I am Lowry and I'm Dean's support mentor. I am a small white woman in my early 30s. I'm not going bald just yet. I've got shoulder length brown hair. That's me.
And well, we work together creating content for disability arts online. And today we're going to, talk about the podcast that is run by Disability Arts Online called 213 Things About Me. So, yeah.
So 213 Things About Me tells the story of Rose, who was diagnosed with autism age 36 and took her own life 6 months later. Richard Butchins, who made this podcast series, is also on the autistic spectrum. He was a good friend of Rose's, and he wrote, directed and narrated this kind of drama documentary podcast, which tells Rose's life story through a list of 213 personality traits that she's identified in herself.
And as a matter of fact, I actually know Richard Butchins. I mean, I didn't realise this before, but then I realised I actually saw it at the Battersea Arts Centre in 2017, and I didn't remember until I heard them speak and all that. So yeah, we'll talk about the things that I recognise in the podcast, and things that were very different from my experience. But yeah, just because I'm because I'm an autistic person, everything's rare, different. I shouldn't use that word, but yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah, and we'll talk about your experiences, Dean, and what we hear in the podcast, and we'll try and reflect a bit as well on what the podcast then says to us about autism and society. And the first thing that we want to talk about was Rose's childhood. So in some of the earlier episodes of the podcast, Rose talks a little bit herself about growing up. But in episode 6, which is the last but one episode, we learn a new perspective about Rose's childhood because we meet her mother. And her mother, Miriam, says, Rose was born with a lot of energy and couldn't quite seem to contain it. She says she was a bundle of energy. What parts of this episode jumped out at you, Dean?
I think it's when Rose's mother was talking about Rose as a child and having lots of energy that triggered a lot of things. I mean, there's a lot of things that I didn't remember from my childhood that, it kind of gave me flashbacks basically. And in a way, that's why I kind of reflected on, Rose's story and all that.
We've had a few chats, haven't we, before recording this about the podcast, and after listening to episode 6 again, the trait I picked out that we talked about was trait 82. I was never mischievous or intentionally misbehaved, but I was always in trouble at school.
Yeah, and that would definitely be me because I tried to stand up for myself, when people were just picking on me, but I'd always get into trouble, whenever because I think it's because they all took advantage of my vulnerability. I didn't really know it myself. I mean, I found it hard to, for example, my dad wasn't never diagnosed, but back in his day, so back in the olden days, they didn't really understand it very well. They just what's the word? They just called them silly and all that, and yeah.
And I suppose Rose isn't diagnosed when she's a child either.
Nowadays, everything's very more accepting, whilst 20th century or early 21st century, which is my generation, no one really understood me, or I couldn't fit in, didn't know how to say the right words. People would sort of mock me and take, you know.
Yeah, I was really struck as well by speaking to that, I think, to a lack of understanding or not knowing what to do or what to say. That story that Rose's mother tells about Rose not getting to school on time, where she says that Rose, she got a call from the teacher saying, can you make sure that your daughter comes to school on time? But she was like, I don't understand, because she's been leaving, you know, half an hour early and it's only 3 streets away. And then we find out that Rose has a very like unique way of getting to school. And her mum says, I just assumed that was how she decided she wanted to go to school. What did you think of that?
Well, to be honest, that kind of was a little bit like me. I mean, before school, I used to take, you know, little detours and, you know, yeah, basically, I'd like, rather than just get my plain normal route to school, sometimes I'd like get a train to like, you know, Ealing a little bit and then come back, and just wanted to like, so I just enjoyed freedom and adventure so much. I think it overtook me more than anything else, you know, and that's why I play a lot of it into my art and creativeness, you know.
Mm. And I think there's, yeah, there's something really nice about her mum saying how she sees like Rose having that pleasure as well, like that freedom that I think you're talking about. But we also kind of see in the podcast how Rose doesn't seem to have a name for some of the things that she experiences or the way that people treat her. And we've talked a lot about recognition and giving things a name. You know, and we've got this podcast that's structured around this list of 213 things, which are 213 sort of positive traits that Rose identifies in herself. Does being diagnosed with does the autism diagnosis change how Rose sees herself, do you think?
In a way, it probably does, because, like, you know, I didn't know I was autistic, you know, until I was told, and basically, I guess because I mean, I was a lot younger than when I was diagnosed, but like, you know, I was about 6, 7. I mean, like I said, it was around the late 90s, that sort of thing, and that's like I said, I moved to a special needs school because, like I said, I couldn't finish. Well, basically, I was at a mainstream school before I started my special needs school. I mean, the rest of my friends I met there started, you know, at the time when we started school. I started at a mainstream school, about 30 kids in the class, and it was just a lot. I don't know, it was a lot to take in, and I just didn't know what was wrong with me. I mean, when I moved to my new school, there was only like up to 6 to 10 people in the class. Well, very, very small classes, like, you know, below 10, basically, if you know what I mean.
And what's it like? Like, so you said you didn't know you were autistic until you were told. Like, what's it like being told something like that about who you are?
Honestly, I feel like a different person, you know, like, you know, like, you know, half the time, you know, I'm afraid to, you know, tell people I'm autistic. I mean, no, I used to be anyway. Now I've grown a bit more confident because I guess, you know, I surrounded myself with, you know, the right people, the right crowd. I mean, all my life I've been, you know, sort of trying to find somewhere where I belong. You know what I mean? Like, I want to belong, be part of something, because I never really had that, you know, growing up. I was always pushed out, and even at the special needs school, I was just, no one just wanted me part of their group. You know what I mean? I was just the lone wolf. So now I get it, and I'm like, so I get it now when I'm older. Why couldn't I have it back then? But then I realised, you know, better to have a bit more company now, because then, you know, you've got more connections. You know what I mean? And as an adult, you probably get to do a lot more things that you couldn't do as a child. So, yeah.
And I
guess that's more freedom.
Yeah, and in that way, maybe that's different from what we hear about Rose in the podcast. Like, do you think Rose, is it helpful for Rose when she sees herself or is told that she's autistic?
I don't think so. I don't know. I mean, because I guess when you're told something, you get more closure.
Yeah.
Like with me, when like I said, for a long time, I was autistic, and obviously, like I said, I got diagnosed a bit more earlier, but I still had a lot of I kept trying to keep up with a lot of people, and I just had never had it in me to keep up with everyone. It's I had this memory in my mind, it was basically I was a bit slow at my maths. I think it was a handwriting thing. I can't remember, but yeah, I was a bit slower, and then everyone had the teacher was handing out these cheese scones and all that, and people, a lot of my class would sort of laugh, saying, "Oh, we didn't miss out on one," and I did, and I think that's when the start of it all a lot of it happened. Do you know what I mean? And I realised, this is going to be like a pattern, I guess, and because years later I still remember it, and in a way I still try to get on the same level. It's almost like saying, oh, you can do that, guess what I can do it better. Do you know what I mean? I can check out what I can do. You know what I mean? It's almost I guess that's where my rebellious nature just started to come through and all that.
Yeah, I think there's a resistance, or at least this is one of the things that I've learned more about you as an individual, is that I feel like the way we use autism or sometimes those diagnoses or labels can also come with lots of stereotypes, and those stereotypes you kind of want to get away from because you're a person. There's something about empathy that Richard talks about in episode 4. One of the things that he pulls out is this kind of theory around autism and empathy. So I love number 54 on the list. Rose says, "I don't think it's logically possible to empathize." And remember, she talks a bit about walking in someone else's shoes and how that's just a bad idea. I love the way she kind of shows us how that's kind of fundamentally not very logical. And then Richard points out that these ideas that, for instance, the stereotype that is often wrongly spread that autistic people lack empathy is a very unempathetic thing to say.
I mean, because I think with what Richard Butchins is trying to do, it's sort of raise awareness, defy the odds. You know what I mean? Because it's almost I think everyone, because a lot of us are trying to get rid of this whole double standards bullshit. You know what I mean? It's because no one it's girls only girls wear makeup, but yet I mean we're trying to normalize what what you know what I mean. We're trying to normalize the double standard label. Well, when I say double standards, I mean not normalize double standards, but normalize things that the actual society would be oh no, you can't have that. Oh, you can't have long hair, you're a guy, but look at us, men can have long hair, men can wear makeup, you know what I mean? And look, and men can wear dresses, I mean, there's this little saying oh, back in my day, everyone dressed according to their gender. Back in your day, especially the 80s, look at all these new wave and all these men, long hair, makeup, dresses. Ooh, look at me, And we just do the same for women, women can rock. Women can have awesome. We're all, at the end of the day, we're all human. Yeah. The only difference is our gender. You know what I mean?
I almost yeah, thinking about,
We still bleed red.
yeah, when we think about these, yeah, stereotypes and particularly the labels around autism and empathy, it feels like in the podcast, it changes the way people look at Rose, and it's making me think about language and labels, like who's in control of the way that you talk about yourself, for instance. You know, are those labels helpful?
Yeah, I mean, to a degree they're helpful, but in a way it makes you feel like it kind of categorizes you, you know. And I don't really like feeling like I don't really like being in a category as much. I mean, like, you know, I'm a free spirit, you know. If I like something, I like something, you know. It's kind of like the pansexual way, like, you know, it doesn't matter whether it's the gender or this or that. If it's just all about the freedom of love, you know what I mean? From what I've like read up about it, you know what I mean? Like from what I've learned and been told. I mean, even like now, like I said, I'm still learning stuff about myself. You know, I haven't figured myself out just yet, but I'm getting there. I mean, as I said, I bet you there's probably something out there that I just haven't discovered yet and is waiting for me to discover it, because that's what's been happening over the years. That's why I've probably been hearing about more of music or anything else than I have. Like 10 years ago, there are some musicians and rock stars or subjects which I had no idea about until I started hanging out with different people. I mean, I think the way to learn stuff is just to get to know people, you know what I mean? Like because they could tell you their experiences, and then it's almost like, you know, I think that's where the whole journalism comes on, because you're going on a journey, but you're also learning and taking things in at the same time. I think that's where it comes from.
Yeah, and I think
I just thought of that just now.
Personally, I feel like listening to the podcast, there's a big difference, or there's a big contrast between the label of autism, or like the role of Rose's diagnosis versus her list. Like, I feel like the list of the 213 things says way more about her, and because it's her as a person, and the diagnosis, or like the label of autism, like you were saying earlier, kind of puts you in a category, or it reduces you in some way, even though it's trying to help. Yeah, like, do you think you have a label, Deen, or would you like that?
I mean, I'd say yes and no, if that makes sense. Like I want a I want a label for like maybe the right reasons, like, you know, I mean, but the thing is, I feel like everyone's being labelled for the wrong reasons. You know what I mean? Like, oh, you know what I mean? It's almost like, because when I say like to people, oh yeah, I'm autistic, I'm bisexual and all that, they say, what? Why do you have to tell us? You know what I mean? It's like, that just says it all. You know what I mean? It's like, why do you have to tell us? Doesn't matter. You're you know. As long as you're not an arsehole, I'll hang out. You know what I mean? And I can relate to that. I mean, like, you know.
Yeah.
I don't judge people based on, you know, what they look like or what, you know, mentality they have. I judge them on whether they're an arsehole or not, you know, or how they treat other people, you know.
Am I an arsehole?
Nope. I'll probably tell you if you were.
I was going to say, yeah, I imagine at some point you would have told me over the last few months.
Yeah.
But if I am an arsehole, please tell me. Yeah, I really, really agree with that. And I think the fact that we are doing this, the fact that I have the job I have and you have the job you have, I think shows that we are all human beings underneath, and there are people in the world who, even though, like you say, labels and language and these things that try and divide us, like try and divide you and me, actually they're not real. The stuff that really binds us is the kind of human experience. And and bringing that back to kind of the conclusion of the podcast. So obviously they're being released each week, sorry. So there's a couple more episodes to go. And we know from the very start of the podcast that Rose takes her own life. It's, you know, it's a very sad story, even though there are lots of kind of funny moments within the podcast. And the last couple of episodes really raise that issue of belonging. And you've talked quite a lot about finding your tribe, finding your people. Did Rose find her tribe?
In a way, I don't think she did, because like I said, everything came to her really late. And then, you know, she wasn't diagnosed until she was, 36. You know, that's like, well, much later on. And just after that, you know, she topped herself, you know. And that's why, I guess, because, like, you know, she only, because the fact that she didn't know she was autistic until, like, the last minute, I guess, like, because I know with me, I know I'm autistic. So at first I thought I was the only one, and how am I going to get through life? But then I started, you know, I obviously had a few friends at school, but like I said, I only speak to like very few of them, like 3 or 4 of them from school. The rest I don't keep in touch with. But I've reached out and I've seen different levels of people autism. I mean, I've seen autistic people at the, the nightclubs, like the alternatives and all that, you know, all goth, emo, you know what I mean? All the people you wouldn't suspect, but they are.
And
all outcasts.
I love you talk a lot about being the outcast amongst outcasts, or we talked about this a bit earlier on in the week, didn't we? That that's the kind of like that's one of the challenges of life, isn't it? Being true to yourself, but also fitting in or finding a group, or, you know, how do I exist with other people? To kind of wrap up as we come to the end of this chat, what do you think 213 Things About Me is saying about life with autism?
Well, I don't really think there's actually an answer, like, because it's getting to the point where, like, you know, I say I'm still figuring myself out, and I don't know, it's like it's just like one of those stories where, like, you know, it's raising awareness and all that. Like, this is like, like, for example, when I talk about my autism, I can't exactly speak for most people. I just speak on what, like, my level of autism is about. Like, and I say to people, like, well, I think I said this to you once, like, I have a very rare form of autism, probably because, like, I'm not, I mean, I said to my mum, am I on, like, Asperger's? She's like, no, you're not Asperger's, you're just on the spectrum and all that. But where? No label. Get it? No label.
It's like, what's the point of a spectrum if I don't know where I am on it?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I want a label, but at the same time, I don't give a shit if there's no label, because, like, you know, I don't really like labeling myself.
Oh, and so that has made me think even us doing this chat is still maybe part of that, like, difficult negotiation between labels and not labels, because I mean, like, we're 2 people who are human beings having a chat, but we are also having a chat really specifically about, like, it's like me going, tell me about you, Deen, tell me about your world, you know. If we had, like, a proper free equal world, maybe we wouldn't need to do that. We'd all just accept straight away everyone's way of seeing things.
I mean, because, like, yeah, if I ever was, like, a musician, I'd probably writing them, like, you know, put them into music like most people do, you know.
Yeah, exactly. There's still this extra fight that I think you have to go through to be heard, which kind of demonstrates some of the problems that, like, language and putting people in categories or organizing them creates. But ultimately, I feel like we're all human beings, and at least the pleasure of my job is that I get to hang out virtually at the moment, but I get to hang out with this great human being, Deen, every day. And hopefully we can kind of see each other, just as human beings, not as labels.
Yeah.
I suppose that's the challenge. Now, I feel like we've had a good old chat there. Do you want to let everybody know where they can find the podcast if they want to listen, catch up?
Well, the podcast, the episodes that have already been released are on Spotify. The ones that haven't been released are on Dropbox because.
Oh yeah, there are separate. Well, we get access to them, but they will be released on Spotify or.
Yeah. Don't go the pirate route. Don't go pirate. Wait for them to be released.
Don't hack our Dropbox.
Yeah. That's piracy. digital piracy.
Yeah, we can't be advocating for that, can we? They'll all be on Disability Arts Online as well. So if you want to listen to 213 Things About Me, you can find it on the Disability Arts Online website /collections, or anywhere that you listen to your podcasts. I want to say thank you for listening, everybody. Do you want to sign us off, Deen?
Yeah, thanks for listening, tuning in, and more to come, and stay tuned. Peace out.